Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Reinvent Money. I'll be hosting today with Paul Buitink. Yesterday, we had a great discussion with Ben Dyson and Dominic Frisby. We learned a lot about their ideas about monetary reform, and we particularly talked a lot about the positive money movement. Today, we'll be interviewing Emma Donny. Welcome, Emma.
Hi.
Hi. And Emma is from a related initiative in Switzerland, and we look very much forward to talking to you today. So maybe we should start because you actually have a pretty interesting background because you started as a PhD in molecular electronics and then were a scientific researcher for quite a few years. What brought you to monetary activism? What got you excited about money?
Yeah, well, as you say, I'd done a PhD, then I was working in R&D in a technology company, and it was at the time when the dot-com boom was really taking off. And at the same time, I started doing a part-time MBA when I was being taught finance and economics. And what I was being taught and what I was experiencing was so far apart because my company floated on the stock exchange, went straight into the FTSE 100 index with a market capitalization the same as British Airways, and we only had about 700 people and a few ideas, basically. And at the same time, I was being taught about efficient market hypotheses, and it just didn't make sense to me. And the more it didn't make sense to me, the more interested I got. And that really led me to take a completely different path. And then I worked for a while at the New Economics Foundation in London, where I did a report on behavioral economics. And then at the same time, I came across the ideas of monetary reform, and I met James Robertson, who was one of the people who wrote very, early on about how the banking system worked. And I really wanted to get a project off the ground in 2005, but it was nobody was interested in 2005. Everything was going swimmingly, so that didn't happen. And yeah, then my life changed again because my daughter arrived. I had a baby, and I sort of rather missed the financial crisis with being at home. But then I found myself living in Switzerland, and I was very, very happy to discover that there was really exciting stuff going on in Switzerland. So now I'm a board member of Modernisierung, which is the organisation, the NGO that is bringing the Swiss sovereign money initiative.
Okay. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what this initiative is and what your relation is with Positive Money, who we spoke to yesterday. Maybe a bit of the history of it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, after the financial crash, what happened, I mean, in both the UK and in Switzerland, is people got more interested in banking, and the two organisations developed completely independently. In Switzerland, Hans-Rudi Weber is the founder of the organisation, and he read the book written by James Robertson and Josef Huber that had recently been translated into German. And he started this NGO, realising that Switzerland was in a unique position because of its direct democracy. And of course, since then, we've linked up with Positive Money, and we communicate often, and there's now the international movement for monetary reform, and which Positive Money has helped to set up, and that then so we're all part of that, and we help each other, but we are sort of independent organisations.
Okay.
And
But you
yes, I
want
go on
very
to
similar. You want very similar things. You're
absolutely yes,
okay.
yes, yes.
Good, good.
So So shall I explain a bit about how the system of direct democracy in Switzerland?
Absolutely, I think that would be very
Yeah.
useful. Yeah.
Yeah. So what it is in Switzerland, there's a written constitution, and if 100,000 people sign up to a change in the constitution, there will be a national referendum, and that's what Hans Rudi Weber realized, that Switzerland was in a special position because we could initiate this referendum. So first of all, um, he got together a small group of experts, mainly university professors, to write a new text for the constitution, which is written. And then we had a year and a half's time to collect these signatures. So we've all been out on the street and stopping people talking about monetary reform, which is quite interesting because it's quite a difficult topic to bring on a street corner in the rain and things, but you know, we've managed that, and so 100,000 people, actually over 110,000 people, have signed up to have this referendum, and the Swiss authorities have confirmed that they have the right number of signatures, so this will happen. It takes a while in Switzerland because it has to be discussed by the Federal Council and then by both houses of Parliament. So it's very likely to be in about 3 years' time, possibly only 1 year if everything goes really quickly, possibly longer. So it takes a while.
That's like 8 million people living in Switzerland, right? So 110,000 signatures. It's like it's almost 1.5%. It's not bad for such a difficult topic.
Yeah. No, it was, yeah. It does require quite a lot of hours of people standing outside, and you know, we managed to get quite a lot of people involved actually to help do that. And you know, at the very beginning, I was a bit doubtful, were we going to make it or not? But actually, yeah, in the end, we made it quite easily.
And what exactly are the legal implications of? So, in a lot of countries, referendums are sort of, you know, sort of suggestions for something for the government to talk about. In the Netherlands, we have referendums, and I think their legal status is that politicians can ignore them if they like. So,
no,
well,
in
that might be a bit of an extreme. That might be a bit extreme. But what exactly does it mean if the voters accept a proposal like yours in the referendum?
The people. So what people have signed up to is a particular change in the text of the Constitution. And on the voting paper, there will be this text, this proposed text for the change to the Constitution. If people vote in favour, it's not like a suggestion or a proposal or something. It will happen.
It will happen. Okay.
It will happen, so that it is binding on the you know, the Swiss government to bring it in if people. You know, so if we get, it needs over 50% of the vote and over 50% of the cantons to come into existence.
But doesn't the Constitution already read that it is up to the Swiss Confederation to create money? It says it's quite literally in the Constitution.
It does. However, with especially with sort of the electronic banking and things, and the banks always manage to give out book money, and then of course with electronic money this has become more and more, so that now 90% of the money in circulation is actually doesn't come from the Swiss National Bank. It comes from the banks when they make loans. So this is the same as what I know Ben Dyson was discussing yesterday. When somebody goes to the bank to get a loan, this money is created by the bank, and the person gets the loan, and the bank has the asset, which is the mortgage or whatever it is the person's borrowed the money for. And this is just the banks can create money supply.
Okay, so
and this is. Yeah, it's you could read the Constitution and say, hang on a minute, but it should be the case that it's already not allowed, but clearly it's happening. So in this rewording of the Constitution, we make it absolutely clear that only the Swiss National Bank can bring in the money supply, and the banks would work as intermediaries.
So, and you mentioned earlier, so I think that's important for our viewers to know. So it's not just 50% of the popular vote. It's also within every canton. Is it correct that you need at least 50%
Yes.
of the voters?
Yes.
How
Yes.
many cantons are there in Switzerland?
I think there's 26, but some of them only count. The little ones only count as half, so it's yeah, again a little bit more complicated. But yeah, so that in each area in Switzerland, so you can't have, you know, one area in Switzerland imposing their will on another area in Switzerland is the idea.
And so what, so that's an important question, I think, because so last year, I think it was in, Paul, you probably remember exactly, I'm not sure when it was, but there was this initiative in Switzerland for the central bank to have a certain amount of its assets in gold.
Yes.
And that didn't succeed. What do you think the chances of success for your proposal are, and what are you doing? What's your strategy in order to ensure?
Yeah. Well, it's clearly it's going to be quite a big challenge. And our strategy at the moment, we're trying to get into as many different groups as we can, so that we're trying to you know, promote the ideas and educate people, because so many people don't understand how the banking system works. So we're trying to get into, say, you know, groups of lawyers, groups of doctors, groups of, you know, groups like that. And we're also trying to get actions in each individual canton. So we're sort of trying to sort of cut society in different ways, if you like, and you know, have an action group for each of these different ways.
Because you guys have done a survey too, right? That supported your argument that people have no clue in Switzerland. Like already Ben Dyson said yesterday in the UK, not only the politicians but the people on the street. And in Switzerland, what's the percentage of people that think that banks just borrow and lend instead of create?
Oh dear, is it? I think was it 78% or something? So yeah, most people don't realise that the banks are bring the money into being. Most people believe that the Swiss National Bank at least has got something to do with it, which it hasn't. And the same survey had a very positive result. I think at the end of the survey, which was properly randomized with more than 1,000 people being asked, and at the end of the survey they were asked if they would vote for the Vollgeld for the Swiss Sovereign Money Initiative, and I believe 57% said yes. So that's very positive.
React when so you've done this a lot on the streets. So how do people react when you tell them how it really works?
I think quite a lot of people, since sort of the crash, and you know, with one of the big banks in Switzerland, UBS, that had to be bailed out after, you know, in 2008 or something, so that a lot of people are aware of that sort of thing, so that they're, you know, quite a lot of people feel that something isn't quite working right in the banking sector. So I would say that, you know, sort of pretty positive. And you've always got the case that, you know, when you're doing out on the streets, you know, it's almost most people are sort of too busy to stop and talk. But of the ones that are willing to stop, I would say that yeah, it was pretty positive.
But Switzerland is famous, of course, for its mountains, watches, but also its banks. It's in a way it's a banker nation, right? A lot of wealth is generated because of the banks you guys have, and also because of the power they have. This would mean reduction of their powers. A lot of people depend on the banks, I guess, in Switzerland, or is that maybe just the elite and most commoners are not really profiting from that circumstance?
Yes, I think what you say there is very true, and it's very international. I believe most of the big banks, I think, all work in English, which is quite surprising because they're in Switzerland. You thought they might. Yeah, so they use, you know, they employ a lot of people from outside of Switzerland. But on the other hand, so people have said, that this is a sort of bad for our banking sector. However, Switzerland is also very famous for its wealth management. Well, if you've had brought in sovereign money, where you can't get a run on the bank, and you can't, you're unlikely to get such severe crashes. Well, actually, wouldn't a lot of more people want to bring their money into Switzerland? Wouldn't it be very good for the Swiss banking sector to have the most stable money supply that there is, which is actually legal tender? So there's an argument that actually it could benefit the banking sector.
It would be very interesting to see, I think, because we were speaking about that yesterday with Ben and Dominic as well. I asked him, which country would you hold up as an example for how things should go, and then they said, well, they all kind of work the same. So it would be very interesting to see, a place like Switzerland succeed and have a very different system, to see what kind of reaction that brings. And perhaps indeed a lot of money will start doing a lot of people will start doing their banking in Switzerland. I think it would be very, very interesting to see.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now maybe Iceland is probably the first country to, because they are of course even much smaller than Switzerland, and they're also a bit further in the process of perhaps getting this implemented, because the Pirate Party is there leading party in the polls, and the Pirate Party is supporting sovereign money as well. So maybe Iceland can test it out first. So we finally have
that would be great. Yes.
laboratory where we can test these types of monetary models. But then, of course, it's possible, if it's become successful in Iceland, that the financial powers would squash the initiative or would try to speculate against this full reserve currency in Iceland, putting a lot of pressure on the government and the people to make it fail in a way. I mean, they will not give in easily, of course, to people with vested interests. So maybe it's good to not be the first country to implement this, and maybe wait until Iceland is.
Well, I mean, we don't have a choice, and we'll obviously sort of go with what we've got. So there's for us the process is now sort of with the Swiss authorities, and so there's we'll do our best with the referendum, whether Iceland has got there before or not. I'm just wondering, we haven't actually said in detail sort of what it is. Should we explain a bit more about that?
Sure.
Well, just so at the moment, I've already mentioned that it's the banks that bring in 90% of the money in circulation. So the idea of this change to the constitution is that only the Swiss National Bank can bring money into circulation. And they can do this by one of two methods. They can provide money to be spent into the economy, or they can lend banks money, so that they have quite a bit of flexibility. So the sort of the spending would be the sort of that they would estimate how much growth there is in the economy, and then you'd want the money supply to grow roughly the same as the growth in the economy, so you probably spend that into the economy, but the fine-tuning would be done by the lending. And the Swiss National Bank would have a mandate to operate in the interests of Switzerland as a whole, and it wouldn't be answerable to politicians, but if it didn't fulfill its mandate and obey the laws that come from the Constitution, then somebody could take it to court and complain that it's not doing its job. So that the Constitution is sort of above the it's the highest thing in the country, which everybody's got to obey. And so the Swiss National Bank wouldn't have any say how the money is spent into the economy. That would be up to the politicians. They just say how much, and the politicians then can choose whether they want to lower people's taxes, or whether they want to spend it on public works, or whether they want to give it out as a citizen's dividend, whatever.
But wouldn't that create a lot of indirect pressure on the central bankers to? I mean, if I were a politician, I'd certainly enjoy having more money than less. So doesn't this indirectly create? I mean, who has oversight on this process, right? So you can take the central bank to court, but I mean, there's a I mean, what is in the public interest and what the central bank should do and what politicians should do is a very broad concept. So how well do you think they can be held accountable in this system?
I feel, I mean, sort of what comes out of the Constitution will be various laws about how exactly they're going to organize it. So that isn't up to us, and I think that you've just got to make the separation very, very clear. And when you're looking into the laws, I would say, I mean, I'm entirely speculating here, but it'd be quite possible to say that to make sure that the Swiss National Bank can't bring too much money into existence. Perhaps that they'd even want to sort of specify, how much growth there has been, and you couldn't expect, more than so much percent than what there was last year, or I don't know, something. So actually, sort of to put a real limit on it. I don't know, but I would feel that it should be quite possible to, have something which is very cut and dried, so that isn't possible, and so the Swiss National Bank can easily say, this is in the best interest, or this is how I've got to carry out my work, and it's not possible for the politicians to interfere with that.
But that's already quite subjective, right? Because by assuming that money growth should be equal to economic growth in order to have stable pricing, that is already then you already build upon the assumption that stable price growth in and of itself is a good thing. Because there's also, of course, classical economists or Austrian economists who say the amount of money doesn't really matter as long as prices can adjust. So you can keep the amount of money exactly the same over many years, and then if you have more economic growth, then prices will just have to adjust downwards. And if you have less economic growth, then price can adjust upwards, because it's just one side of the coin, the monetary growth. You don't necessarily need growth. That's what a lot of classical economists say. So by baking into the constitution that you want. So how do you counter that? Because there's already a political decision, or to choose this economic theory over other ones.
I sort of see what you're saying, but I don't know so much about those theoretical ideas. But if you're saying that the amount of money doesn't matter, then it wouldn't matter keeping it in tune with growth either. I'm not sure.
If you assume an equal amount of money and there's more growth, that just means that the same amount of money is chasing more goods and services. So the price of these goods and services would need to go down in that money.
I understand that, but then what's wrong with saying why would it matter if you increased the amount of money? And what would be the argument against doing that?
That's inflation then.
Well, so I mean, the National Bank anyway has a mandate. I mean, then that's also price adjustment, isn't it? Inflation. But the National Bank, it has a mandate on stability of prices, and
which is a political decision.
Yeah.
I mean, my point is that I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but it's just that a lot of these policies are based on economic theories, and these theories are conflicting.
Yes.
For example, in the general interest of the Swiss population, some measures could be good for Swiss savers, some other ones could be good for Swiss borrowers. For example, a saver doesn't like inflation, not even 0% inflation, he probably prefers deflation. For a borrower, it's the other way around. So, but I guess you need to find.
But having a big financial crash in general is not good for anybody, and that's I guess one of the major benefits of having a sovereign money system, is that you don't have this idea that debt and money have to be the same and have to go up together.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. That sounds that's very important, and actually quite interesting in a lot of different schools of thought. Even in the Austrian school of thought, where people are usually very much for currencies backed by hard assets, there is also a sense in which money is at least partly an asset rather than a debt, and I think that's a very very important idea.
How would the transition be in let's say at some point there's D-Day, when or is it going to be a smooth transition in different stages, or are you guys planning for an overnight change in the system?
It would be an overnight transition, and then all of the money in people's bank accounts the next morning would be sovereign money, full legal tender. They could go on exactly as before. I mean, that's now, I think as a sort of Swiss citizen, you wouldn't notice any big change. The way the accounts are done at the banks would be different. So this money would be more like coins and banknotes, and which are sovereign money, which are brought into existence by the Swiss National Bank. So overnight, this money in people's bank accounts becomes like electronic money, which is sort of like an electronic purse that the Swiss National Bank holds on behalf of the person who has their bank account at the bank. And at the same time, the bank, and if you look at it from the bank's perspective at the moment, if you have money in the bank, it's like the bank owes you that money. That's something which, if you ask for it, the bank would give it to you. Or it's a promise to give it to you. They don't, and overnight, rather than the bank owing you that money, it would change to the bank owing the Swiss National Bank that money, so that money is still owed, but it's no longer it's no longer to you because you have a bank account there. The Swiss National Bank is in a way sort of provided the bank with this electronic legal tender to give to you, and they've taken that that sort of debt, if you like, so that the banks then owe them.
So the essence of what you want to do is, now we have electronic money, we have physical money. We treat them in society like they're exactly the same thing, but they're not really the same thing. What you want to do is you want to make them exactly the same thing, and you can basically do this overnight. This is your
yes.
But then once the transition has been completed, then would it still be necessary for people to hold an account at a commercial bank if they just want to store the tokens? Or do they have to store the tokens on a side account?
From their point of view, I mean, what we call current accounts in English, that would be, would look just the same.
So they would still be dependent on commercial banks for payments?
Yes, so the commercial banks would still operate the payment systems on behalf of their customers, yes.
But why do we still need that payment network? Like, for example, we also have decentralized payment systems based on blockchain technology where people can just own the private keys to their tokens themselves.
Yeah.
Why would we still need banks
I mean, whilst that is the system that everybody, a lot of people are used to, then you wouldn't want to suddenly take it away from people overnight. Then, So I should also say that with this initiative, we have specifically mentioned alternative currencies, so currencies such as bitcoins. So they would be allowed, but whilst there's one dominant currency that's used to such an extent that if there's a crash, this would be a major blow for Switzerland, for the Swiss people, then the Swiss National Bank, needs to intervene and sort of look after this currency on behalf of Switzerland, and
I get the fact that you guys want to have your own currency, that you don't want to be dependent on another currency, but you can use the technology in order to manage your own currency. For example, you don't necessarily need commercial banks to manage the new legal tender Swiss franc.
Yeah. Well, then we're quite happy with people doing it any other way. If there's another currency that people start using, that's fine. If it gets to a level when, if a crash in this currency would cause a major problem, then the Swiss National Bank would have to intervene and would, also have the power to start, controlling that currency. However, if there were several competing alternative currencies that, no one of which would cause a major problem, then that's quite okay.
And how do you address privacy concerns with if people? If all the cash becomes electronic, basically, would you?
Well, we're not saying all the
privacy?
Cash. We're not sort of saying we're not taking away coins and banknotes. That would continue as it is.
So you would not want, because in Sweden, for example, and also in other countries, there's this trend towards removal of cash from society because it's dirty and criminals use it and you name it. But of course, a lot of people like it because of the privacy. Is that something?
Yeah, and it's something which is simply isn't covered by What we're saying is that with the electronic money that is used for transactions, that the Swiss National Bank should bring that into existence and control the amount the amount of the money supply, but we're not. Yeah, I mean, we don't say anything about the banknotes and the coins, so that under this change there would be no change to those.
And what exactly is the timeline for the whole initiative? When will Swiss voters actually vote on this proposal?
As I said, this depends very strongly on first of all, the Federal Council. They have up to 1 year to discuss it, and then they, at the end of that, they make a proposal as to whether they think that it should be accepted or not. And but they can do that more quickly than a year. So we don't know. Sort of, they might, if they discuss it, very soon, and then sort of hand it on, that time becomes shortened. And then it goes to both houses of Parliament, who do the same. They also debate it, and they have up to 2.5 years, but it could be quicker. And then either the Federal Council or the Swiss Parliament, if they want to, can propose an alternative, and that would also appear on the voting paper. So then they're allowed more time to work out the details of their alternative. So it's quite hard to know, basically, because if everybody discusses it very quickly, then I think it typically takes about 9 or 10 months to come to the referendum after the Parliament has finished discussing it. But if alternatives start to be discussed, then it can go out for longer. So we'll have probably about 10 months notice of when it's going to come to referendum, but we don't know that at the moment.
Okay, and then the role of these other bodies is they can propose alternatives.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they make a suggestion. So when people in Switzerland get a sort of whole booklet when there's a vote, and they see what the what the suggestion of the Federal Council is and what the suggestion of Parliament is, and their reasoning, so that they can sort of and they see also a text from us saying that why we're wanting to make this change. So then people have can read all of this and then make up their minds.
I see. Well, maybe it's a good time to see if we have some questions from the audience. Do you have any?
Yeah, so yesterday we had a glitch with Google, so people couldn't watch it live. This time it's working. I see people watching. So if people want to ask Emma a question, now's the time before we wrap up. So maybe let's just wait a little bit for that. But Emma, in any case, It was a very interesting story and very heartwarming. It's also great to see women active in the monetary activism community. And where can people find more about your initiative?
Yeah, if you look up, I've worked out. I had to print it out on a mirror image. So if you do a Google search on Folgeld, it's actually Folgeld, www.folgeld-initiative.ch. But if you just do a search on Folgeld, you find it, or on the Swiss sovereign money supply, you find it. Okay. And there's quite a lot of more information on the English pages there. Yeah. So
I'll put the link also in the show notes, and so I urge everyone to take a look there. Also, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to our channel. That's very important to us to keep on doing the work. And Emma, again, thank you so much. We'll keep on following you, and we need to be patient because apparently it will take a few years, but they'll probably stretch it as much as they can. By then, the system probably already has collapsed, but.
Well, a minor crash might help us, but we don't really want a major one. Wouldn't wish for that.
No,
but,
okay.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see where this is going. I think this is very exciting. I think it's very exciting that in Switzerland, I don't think it's as easy to change anything as in other places as in Switzerland. I think that's what makes it so exciting. So we'll definitely keep following you and maybe have you back on the show sometime when some changes have been made.
Great.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thanks. Take care, and talk next time.
Thank you for inviting me. Okay,
That's
bye.
fine. Bye.
Bye.